So free agency is starting to kick up in high gear now with more and more signings coming in throughout the league. And of course, for the Bulls, we got the word on their first signing in free agency that wasn't one of their own free agents, the big man from the Indiana Pacers, former number 10 overall pick from the 2020 draft in Jalen Smith. And since the signing, I've had some people ask, who is this guy? I've never heard of him. And because I know we have watchers on this channel from all different levels of interest in the NBA, whether it be the most avid follower of the league to a casual watcher who just enjoys the game of basketball. So I thought I'd do a deeper dive into who Jalen Smith is for those Bulls fans who maybe aren't as familiar with him, his game, what he can bring to the Bulls, and also what it means for the rest of the Bulls and their offseason with this signing. So what's going on, everyone? You're listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Now, I mentioned this in the video from earlier this morning, but the Bulls have signed Jalen Smith to a 3-year, $27 million deal, which they likely will use the bulk of the mid-level exception for this signing. This also hard caps the Bulls, which limits their ability to sign additional players as well as find a potential sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan because they aren't able to take back more money than they send out at this point. But we'll talk about that in a little bit and the impact that has on the Bulls and the rest of their offseason. But let's talk about Jalen Smith, where he comes from, what he brings, and why this is actually a good, low-risk, potentially high-reward signing. So Jalen Smith, coming out of high school, was actually one of the top prospects of his class in 2018, was ranked 16th overall and a 5-star recruit with a 93 overall grade from ESPN. He would go on to play college basketball for the Maryland Terrapins, and it was expected that Smith was most likely going to be a one-and-done college player and declare for the draft in 2019. And while Smith had a solid freshman season in which he put up near 12 points per game, 7 rebounds, and 1.2 blocks, he was projected at that time to be a mid to late first rounder in the draft, and thus he decided to stay for his sophomore season in college to really up his value. And of course would have a dominant sophomore season where he would put up numbers in being a double-double machine, putting up over 15 points per game and 10 rebounds and 2.5 blocks. He would go on to be named third-team All-American and first-team All-Big Ten. Unfortunately, though, for Smith and every other NCAA athlete that year, the season would abruptly end with no March Madness tournament due to the pandemic, but Smith, given his success and draft projection and likely being a top 10 pick, would declare for the draft in 2020 and was selected by the Phoenix Suns 10th overall. Now, right away in his rookie season, it was clear Smith was not NBA ready. This was going to be a project player that needed significant development, and with the Suns and their rapid rise of success going from being a lottery team to the NBA Finals in 2021, just did not have time to wait for a player like Jalen Smith to develop, nor did they have the rotation minutes and opportunities for Smith to get any kind of run. And initially, people were talking about Jalen Smith being a bust and how the Suns really blew this pick when they could have had a player like Tyrese Haliburton. Smith would barely play in his rookie season, spending a good amount of time in the G League, and after not even a season and a half with the Suns, they would trade him for parts to the Indiana Pacers at the 2022 trade deadline, where they would send the Pacers a second-round pick and Smith in exchange for none other than current Bulls player Torrey Craig. And right away, when you saw Smith being given more opportunity on a Pacers team who at the time were in a bit of a rebuild, they just traded Sabonis for Tyrese Haliburton, and in finishing out the final 22 games of the season, Smith averaged 13.4 points per game on 7.6 rebounds, shooting 37% from 3 on 3.8 attempts per game, a true shooting percentage of 62%, very efficient on offense. That said, his numbers did dip the following season and of course last season as well, with the Pacers emerging as a contending team after the Siakam trade, which would give Smith less run and opportunity, but even then last season, he still put up 10 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, and shot 42% from 3, albeit on low volume, and while playing 17 minutes per game. So a pretty productive player overall when given the minutes. He's a big that can space the floor, which the Bulls need, but also finish around the basket using his length to grab offensive rebounds for second chance points. I think the biggest concern here is he hasn't been great on defense. He actually was a solid defender and rim protector in college, but that has not been the case in the NBA going up against some of the best players on the planet. He oftentimes gets lost in the pick and roll, has a hard time staying in front of his man and getting beat off the dribble, and I do think it's a bit telling that Smith could barely crack the rotation in the playoffs, which again, to be fair, rotations are always going to be short in the postseason, and it's not like Smith was the first or second guy coming off the bench for the Pacers. But regardless, all of that is to say that yes, there are downsides to Jalen Smith. And sure, there is a world where this signing doesn't really pan out and he doesn't amount to much in the NBA, but honestly, the way I look at it, and the fact that the Bulls are going down this youth movement route and probably going to lose a lot of games next year, it doesn't really matter. This upcoming season at this point does not matter outside of just focusing on player development, seeing if you can get some breakout seasons from some of these younger guys, and hopefully having this be fun basketball even if they are losing. I mean, watching a season where you're expected to lose and having low expectations is vastly better than watching a team that is unintentionally losing with high expectations. And so I guess the point in all this is to say, if this doesn't work out with Smith, it's not really going to impact the Bulls long term. It's a shorter term agreement, it's on a team-friendly deal, so it's a movable contract should they want to package it in a trade. The Bulls aren't trying to contend now, so it's not like they need immediate impact players like they needed impact players last year's free agency. But should Jalen Smith thrive in a new role on a young team in a new environment, he's only 24, so hasn't even entered his prime yet. I mean, we've talked about this before, but development is not always linear. And so there is a world where you can see Jalen Smith breaking out at, say, age 25 or 26. Not saying he's going to be a star, he'll never be that type of player, but a high-level contributor who fits the mold of a modern-day big that can help the Bulls in this next era of Bulls basketball. Now, I mentioned this signing and how it's going to impact what else the Bulls do, because they are now hard capped after making this move, and the only way they can make additional moves is by way of trades, which we're obviously still holding out to see if there will be a deal for Zach LaVine, although the market, according to reports, is still very barren at this point. And then as it relates to DeMar and a potential sign-and trade, that is becoming increasingly more unlikely, as the Bulls would, one, have to take back less salary in return in a sign-and trade deal, and two, depending on the figure DeMar is looking for in a new contract, the Bulls aren't going to be willing to bring back a lot of salary in return because it would put them over the luxury tax, and without a clear path for trading Zach LaVine, they're not going to be willing to do that and would most likely prefer to just let DeMar walk than agreeing to take on a bad contract that would put them over the tax. I'm not saying it's out of the realm of possibility, and there have been reports that the Lakers are eyeing DeMar to pay him that full mid-level exception, and maybe there is a way where they could work out a sign and trade for a player like Rui Hachimura, but that would still put the Bulls over the tax. So I don't know. They really need to move Zach LaVine in order to make all of this work. That's what it really boils down to. Otherwise, it's a much more likely scenario that they let DeMar walk for nothing because they won't be able to afford him to stay, and they won't be able to afford moving him in a sign and trade given how close they are to the luxury tax at this point in time. DeMar's also in a tough spot as well because he went from potentially commanding $40 million per year, a deal that was apparently on the table from the Bulls in an extension for 2 years, and he turned it down, to now the market drying up a bit with teams now having little to no cap space to sign him, and sign and trades no longer being an option for the Bulls. Thus, DeMar is now forced into a situation where he's going to have to take the mid-level exception from a few teams who actually even have that available to them, because a team like the Clippers, who DeMar was being linked to the most, no longer have that exception after they gave most of it to Derrick Jones Jr. So the Lakers or the Sixers are the most likely options at this point. But even then, it's going to be hard to make a deal work, and DeMar's going to have to take significantly less money than what was initially thought. It'll be interesting to see how these next few days pan out. Hell, even these next few hours, who knows? Maybe DeMar is already signed with a team by the time I upload this. That's how fast things move in the NBA during free agency. But let me know your guys' thoughts on the Bulls signing Jalen Smith. Let me know in the comments. As always, be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.